Father's Day is a special day. It's a day that we celebrate dads, obviously, but I also know that it's a day that can be complicated for some of you, not just in terms of whether you had a dad or not, but maybe for some of you there have been dads that left some wounds in your life. And so I just want to say there's space for all that this morning, and we're glad that you're here. I think all of us would agree, though, that we need healthy fathers and healthy men in the world. Not just people that carry the title of a father, but understand what it means, especially through the lens of God. And that's what we're going to talk about a little bit this morning. And I'll be talking specifically to men and fathers, but what I'm about to share today will be applicable to everyone that's joined us this morning. This past week, I had an event at my kids' daycare. And if you don't know how daycares work, here's how it works. You take out a mortgage to put your kids in daycare. And then, not only do you have to do that, you have to take time off from your work to go be with your kids at daycare, right? And there's something every single week. They have something planned. And the worst part about these events is that if you miss one of these events at daycare, you and your child will be scarred for the rest of your life. I know I'm venting a little bit about daycares, but here's what happens. So some of these events, like with a foam party or pizza party or bounce house, whatever it is that they're doing, if you don't show up, sometimes they don't let your kids participate without the parents being there. And so a couple of weeks ago, my wife and I, we try to make as much as we can, and we try to go to them as much as we can. A couple of weeks ago, there was a party, and we couldn't go. And partly because I was like, you guys just had a party last week, and we were just there. So anyway, we couldn't go, and later that evening, we get home, and my daughter says, how come you guys didn't show up? I was the only kid in the class, sitting in my classroom. Everyone else got to go to the party. How could you do this to me? So this is what daycares do. I know, I blame the daycares, not the parents. This past week, they had an event for fathers. It was Pizza with Dads. And I've been at the daycare long enough to know how these dads events go. Basically what happens is there's a bunch of dads sitting at kids' tables in silence while they have party rock playing in the background, and we're just eating our food. No one talks to themselves, and no one talks to one another. They're just kind of sitting and not sure what to do. It's kind of awkward. So this past week, I'm at this party. I got my girls with me, and we're eating pizza, and there's a guy at the table with me, and I'm thinking, you know what? We have to be here. So let's make the best of it. Let's talk amongst one another. Let's get to know one another. So I look at the guy and I say, hey man, how are you doing? How's your day going? You guys doing all right? And he said, good. And then he looked down. And then for 10 minutes, there was no conversations. He looks down, doesn't make eye contact one more time. He gets up, he walks away without saying anything. And I don't think that it's because he's a bad dude. He's probably a great guy. I don't know him at all. But my point is this, and I've seen this over and over, I just don't think he knew what to do with another man trying to connect with him at that level. Like those muscles weren't exercised. Because if you go to the moms events, which I've kind of sneaked into some of the moms events, totally different vibe. There's noise in there. People are talking. They're using their mouths to talk to one another. They're exchanging phone numbers with one another. My wife came back a couple of weeks ago from another event, a mom's event, actually it was Mother's Day. She said, I got to connect with another mom, and we were connecting over postpartum. Like, there's deep connections happening at the mom's event. And I'm not making an absolute statement about men's and women's events. I know there's nuance and complexity to everyone, but here's why I share this. I think men, especially in 2026, we are in a constant struggle to figure out our identity and our place in life, especially when it comes to our relationship with others. And here are some stats that might show this to you. In 1990, they did a study, and they asked men in America, how many of you have 6 close friends in your life? These are people that you can pick up the phone and call if you're in trouble, or people that you can pick up the phone and call if you want to hang out or talk about your relationship, whatever it may be. 6 close friends that you can call. 55% of men in America had at least 6 close friends in 1990. The study was done again in 2021, just a few years ago, and that number dropped from 55 to below 25%. So that means over 75% of men in America don't have at least 6 men in their lives that they can call or talk to whenever it is that they want to talk to someone. You might be thinking, 6 friends, like I would love just to have one friend in my life. They did that study in 1990 as well, and the amount of men who said they had 0 friends in 1990, that number has multiplied by 5 since then. And what these studies show is that there is a generational collapse when it comes to connection and relationships that men have entered in. It shows us that many of the men in this room were 1 or 2 relationships away from being completely lonely, and most of us don't even realize this. because we don't talk about it. It's another thing that we're not really good at. And so the irony of dads getting full off of pizza, sitting at a table, not talking to themselves, is that we're actually starving for fulfillment, for connection, for relationship, for brotherhood, for purpose, for someone to look us in the eye and say, it matters to be a man, and here's what that means for you. And if I'm honest, I don't know if the church, the capital C church, has done a great job of finding this voice apart from culture. In a lot of ways, we've mimicked the culture when it comes to what men are supposed to do. And if the church doesn't do a good job, there are plenty of voices out there that'll tell you how to be a man. Just listen to Joe Rogan or Andrew Tate or all the guys that are out there. They will tell you, this is what you're supposed to do. This is what being strong looks like. This is what being a man looks like. But none of this is working because men make up 50% of the United States population, but also make up over 80% of the suicides that happen in our country. There is a crisis, and I believe the crisis is around our identity. And that's the place that I want to start this morning. When all of us, when we're born into our families of origin, we're all handed a script. And it's a script that tells us how to behave. Imagine your favorite actor or actress trying to play out a part in a new movie, and they're handed a script. My favorite actor is Denzel Washington. And so Denzel gets a script, and he has to act this part out, right? And it's not necessarily who he is in this film, but it's what the script tells him to do. It's how the script tells him to behave, and it tells you who you're supposed to become. And I don't mean to generalize or stereotype. There are outliers in every stat, every study. But when it comes to the script that we're handed, especially men that we're handed, whether it's at home or in culture, the script often looks like a version of this. You're supposed to be strong, have it all together, don't show emotions, make sure you provide, make sure you produce, don't show weakness, don't ask for help. Your value is tied to what you can produce. It's tied to what you can earn. It's tied to what you can build, what you can achieve. It's tied to who your kids become, what your body looks like, what your resume says about you. And if you can perform all of these parts successfully, then you can consider yourself a successful man. But we know from studies, we know from stories, I know from stories from talking to men and families in the church, what the script that's handed to us often produces is isolation and loneliness. There's a loneliness epidemic in our country among men. Depression, lack of purpose. Men who are completely alone because real connection requires not just talking to one another, but vulnerability. And vulnerability, the script says, is weakness. The script has produced men that are exhausted. Because when the goal is performing and getting your bread up and continuing to build something, there's no end to that. The script has produced men who are checking out from their relationships, from their marriages, and checked into screens, checked into work, checked into any sort of addiction or habit that numbs the gap between who they think they're supposed to be and who they are in this moment. And I think, ultimately, the script has forced many of us to have an identity crisis. Who are we? What does it mean to exist in the world as a man? And how do we live out our purpose in this world? If this is the issue in our cultural moment, and this is the epidemic that's been named by organizations outside of the church out there, the good news is that Jesus offers us an alternative to this. And the alternative that Jesus offers us is this: our identity cannot be earned, it can only be fully received. And when we receive our identity as sons and as daughters, we begin to flourish, we begin to be secure, we begin to be rooted and confident in how we exist in the world. This is what we see in the life of Jesus. Think about Jesus. Jesus, at the age of 30, receives his identity before he ever earns it. In Matthew chapter 3, we find the story. Jesus is about 30 years of age. He's progressed beyond boyhood and adolescence, and he's fully in a stage of adulthood. He hasn't preached a sermon that we know of. He hasn't performed any miracles that we know of. He has no real following at this point, but he decides to be baptized. And John the Baptizer baptizes him before he goes into ministry. And here's what happens. Matthew chapter 3, verse 16. As soon as Jesus was baptized, he went up out of the water. At that moment, heaven was opened, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and alighting on him. And a voice from heaven said, "This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased." This is the beginning of Jesus' ministry as we know it for the next 3 years. Everything we know him for, the miracles, the stories, the teachings, the cross itself, before any of that happens, the Father speaks over his life. And he doesn't say, this is my son, look what he's about to accomplish. He doesn't say, this is my son, look what he's about to build and the followers that he's about to have in the world for thousands of years. He doesn't say, this is my son, he's finally earned this right. Before the ministry, before the miracles, before any of it, the Father says, this is my son, I love him, and I am pleased with him. Jesus would step into his ministry rooted and confident in that being his identity, that he was a son loved by his Father before he accomplishes anything. It's hard for us to wrap our heads around this because our cultural understanding of what it means to have identity, we would say our identities are earned, not received. Think about the Spurs in the NBA Finals. It's a little too soon. Think about the Spurs in the NBA Finals. Think about Victor Wembanyama. He could be 10 feet tall and block all the shots in the world and win all sorts of awards. But in San Antonio, his identity as a great Spur will always be compared to other Spurs legends like Duncan and Robinson and Ginobili and Parker. He can win more MVPs he can win his first MVP next year and win more and more and more awards. But he will only earn that identity as a great Spur when he wins an NBA title. In the culture, right? This is how they measure identity. And if he wins one title as a Spur, then he's compared to other players in the NBA and other legends. Like, can you win 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6? It's only when you earn, you receive your identity as being great. It makes sense for us to naturally believe that our identity is something that is earned and not received. Yet the Father is so pleased with Jesus before he ever makes a move. And think about this, immediately after Jesus' baptism, he goes into the wilderness. The Spirit leads him into the wilderness for 40 days of testing. He's fasting for 40 days. He has to overcome 3 temptations from the enemy around his purpose and his calling and God's view of him. And Jesus overcomes all this. Imagine Jesus gets baptized. He goes into the wilderness. He goes into the 40 days of fasting. He overcomes the temptations of the enemy. He comes out, and then a voice from heaven came out and said, this is my son, who I love, and I am pleased with him. We will all say that makes so much sense. It makes so much sense. He went through the testing. He trusted in God. He overcame the temptations of the enemy. He defeated the enemy, and then God gave him his identity as a son. Yet the Father is pleased with the Son before he ever makes a move. This is the good news that the gospel brings into our world of identity crisis. That your identity is received before you achieve, your sonship is received before you ever perform, and you belong before you ever behave. And I just think there's some of us in the room, including myself, who've never understood our lens and our purpose through this lens because we've never been affirmed in such a way. Some of you grew up without a father or without a father figure. Whoever spoke that over you. All intentions aside, some of you had fathers who were present but emotionally absent. Fathers who provided but never really saw you for who you were. Fathers who were impossible to please, and maybe fathers that left wounds in your life. It's no wonder that many men, we spend our lives trying to puff our chests out, trying to prove that we're strong enough because we've never been told we are good enough simply because of who we are, not because of what we have done. And the research around this backs this up. The research shows that without this type of affirmation and understanding, without someone speaking delight into your life, a man will spend the rest of his life trying to earn what he never received from his father. A man will move through his entire life ruled by people's opinions, performing for people that aren't even watching him, longing for someone to notice that he's good enough, that he's man enough, that he's arrived, that he has purpose. The good news about what the Father speaks to Jesus is that because when we come to Christ, we too have been purchased with a cost, and the Father views us with the same lens of sonship. Look what Paul says in Romans chapter 8, verse 15. He says this, you did not receive the spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but you have received the spirit of adoption as sons, by whom we cry, Abba, Father. It's hard sometimes for men in the church to relate to Jesus or relate to the Father because of our own wounds around fathers. There's some healing that needs to happen, maybe not from a 30-minute sermon. But look what Paul is saying. He says, we get to approach God and call him Abba, Father. It's not a formal religious title of God. It's a word that symbolizes intimacy and familiarity and safety. It's me sitting in my office and working on a sermon and my girls rushing through the doors and sitting in my lap. And it's not just for children. Abba, Father implies deep respect, but also intimacy. It's a word, it's language of someone that knows they belong in a family. And Paul says, that's the spirit that you have received when you come to know Jesus. Not the spirit of a performer who earns their position by earning something, but the spirit of a son or a daughter, someone who is already in, someone who's already received, someone who's already loved before they ever perform. Which means the good news for some of you this morning, and for me this morning, is that we are not auditioning. I don't have to audition before God that my sermons will be great for him to love me. You don't have to audition in life. You've already been received because you've been bought with a price. You have received the spirit of a son or a daughter. And if we can get to that point of receiving our identity and being so secure in that, it changes the way that we view ourselves, the way that we view our role as men or individuals, as our fathers. It's the place from which every other area of our life overflows from. And look at the life of Jesus. Jesus, just because he received this identity, doesn't mean that he was a passive man or that he didn't engage in responsibility or he didn't lead people. Look at the life of Jesus. Jesus leads from a place of being a son. Yet Jesus would drive out religious leaders from the temple courts physically who were taking advantage of the poor. Jesus confronted religious leaders and religious power to its face and called it what it was. He called them a brood of vipers for how they were treating people and using religion as a yoke of burden over them. Jesus walks towards the most brutal form of punishment willingly to give himself up for others. In one instance, Jesus says, do you realize I have authority to lay my life down and to take it up again? In other words, he's saying the suffering that I'm about to endure is not because I've been overcome by someone else, but because in my own strength, I've given it up for the sake of others. He uses his strength to give to others, to elevate others. When Jesus is in the garden, there's a mob that comes to try to arrest him, and they say, who are you looking for? And the mob says, Jesus of Nazareth. And he says, I am he. And the Bible says that the men fall back and fall to the ground. Just a glimpse of his strength and his authority. But Jesus doesn't use his strength to dominate. He uses his strength to give to others, to serve others. He washes the feet of his own disciples. He touches the lepers that people would not go near. He stops for the blind outcast that's crying out when the crowds are walking past him. The purpose of Jesus' life was to live out of his sonship, to serve those around him. And if we don't calibrate our lives to see ourselves and see others through this lens, we will be left unfulfilled, searching, yearning, longing for others to notice us when God has already seen us and loved us. Jesus had men around him that didn't understand this, men with anger issues, men that thought that they should live by the sword. In one instance, there's some of his disciples are trying to use Jesus to get themselves in a position of power. And so they're talking behind Jesus' back about who will be greatest and who will be second in command next to Jesus. And Jesus looks at them and says, have you not heard anything I've taught you? The greatest among you must be the least. The disciples were using Jesus as a tool to fulfill their own identity crisis. Which one of us will be second in command? The problem with trying to live our life auditioning for our identity is that we always end up using people as a tool to get that identity. I've seen this from counseling folks or talking with folks. The kids become the trophies, right? And so when your kids don't listen to you and your identity is tied to what you do and how successful your kids are being who you are as a man, when your kids stop to listen, you don't operate out of the heart of a father and how God has loved you, but your kids become used to fuel your own identity crisis in pursuit of what it means to be a man, and you enter into these unhealthy relationships with your kids. Your spouse becomes the same. Your spouse becomes a tool to get what you think manhood is all about. But a man who has received his identity like Jesus, a man who has heard the Father speak, can actually see people, can be present without an agenda, can love without needing anything back from the other. The beautiful part about receiving our identity as sons and daughters in Jesus is not only does it allow us to live out of a life of being completely content because God sees us a certain way, but it also teaches not just to be a son or a daughter, it teaches us how to be fathers. It teaches us how to be followers of Jesus in this world. It teaches us what our roles are as father figures or fathers in the world. I think at times we have reduced the role of a father simply around how well they could provide for their family. And provision matters. I'm not dismissing it. Work hard, showing up, keeping the lights on, putting food on the table. There's an element of that that's rooted in love. There's an element of that that I feel called to as a man, and I'm proud that I'm able to do that for my family. But if I just provided for my kids, it doesn't mean that I'm necessarily a father. Being a provider doesn't make you a father. You can provide for your children and still be emotionally absent. You can give your kids everything they need materially and still leave them with the orphan question, am I delighted by my father? Am I delighted in by my father? Do I have what it takes? Does my father actually see me? And the research on this is clear as well. What shapes a child, what determines whether they grow up secure or performing, whether they grow up whole or wounded, is not primarily what they are given, it's whether they knew they were prized, whether they heard the voice of a father saying, I delight in you, not because of what you can do in this world, but simply because of who you are. It doesn't mean that we dismiss behavior and our kids get to do whatever they want. It doesn't dismiss goals or standards. But a father attends to them for who they are first. Psychologists use the term attunement to describe this. When we're fully aware of what our kids need, not just what they can do for us. Because you can provide from a distance, but you can't father from a distance. You can provide by making more money, but fathering is possible whether you make plenty or very little. One of the things that I like to do in my spare time is think about my funeral. I like to think about what people will say in my funeral. I kind of have a weird obsession with funerals. I'm still working through it. And so I think about who's going to show up at my funeral and what will they say at my funeral. And so I imagine maybe some of the guys from our church from men's basketball will come out and say, you know, Alan was an incredible basketball player. He should have made the NBA. Like, we remember him like scoring on us. They share all these memories. Maybe people come out from church and they say, oh, we liked his sermons, or he was a good pastor. And I thought, what matters the most about what you say in your funeral? And for me, the thing that would matter most to me is not what anyone in the world says, not to dismiss any of that. But did my kids see me as their father? If my kids came up and said, this is my dad, he was a great pastor, you guys know him to be a great pastor. He was always at the church. He was always busy providing. None of that means anything to me. Did they see me as their father that delighted in them for who they were? This is the call in a world where we have an identity crisis, to live from a place of knowing that there is a God that loves us just as we are. And that's the place from which we receive our identity. And out of that place, step in, not to perform more, but to be more present, not to achieve more, but to give away our life, to serve others as men, as fathers, as father figures, in a world that's starving for attention, in a world that's starving for our presence. I want to close by sharing a quick story. Growing up for me, I was handed a script of what it means to be a man and what it means to be a father. And the script that I was handed was this. You have to make lots of money. You have to have a job that is very secure. And you have to be able to provide for your parents when they're older in age. And there's nothing wrong with those things. But everything I did was rooted out of my ability to perform. I remember, I shared this story before many times. I remember, you guys remember back in the day when your kids did well in high school, or middle school, they would get like, my kid is on the honor roll sticker. And people would put that on all the cars. I may have shared this story before, so bear with me. My parents' dream was to get one of those stickers. Because they wanted to drive around and say, my kid was an honor roll student. And guess what? I was never on the honor roll. But I knew like the disappointment every time the report cards came. There were times where the report cards would come in the mail. I don't know if they do that anymore, but they would send it in the mail. I would take it and throw it out. But my parents would never see it. But when they would see the report card, there was this disappointment because my dad knew, like, I'm not going to get that sticker to put on my minivan. And so one year I decided that I was going to bust my butt to get this honor roll sticker. So I did. And so this is how I learned that I could do some things if I just tried a little bit. And so that year I tried really hard. I got on the honor roll, and in came the honor roll sticker in the mail. And I take it to my dad, and I give it to him, and I just break down in tears. Just weeping and sobbing. Because it was the first time that I thought to myself, maybe I'm loved now, right? And that's the script that I was handed, and it's not because my parents weren't well-intended. Mom and Dad are probably watching, so no, you guys did a great job, but I think sometimes we can get caught up in this, what the script tells us to do. And I was also handed a script, not just of what it means to be a man, but what it means to be a father. And over the past 15 years, I've had to do some real internal work. God has had to do some surgery in my life to get me to where I'm at, like softening of myself. And through God, through therapists, through my wife, through mentors, all this has slowly happened. And I thought I had progressed, and I thought I was healthy internally until I had my son. And you guys know the story of my son, Ezra. In fact, I talk about him so many times. He's like a local celebrity wherever he goes. But I've never brought him up. So I want to bring Ezra up to the stage. And I just want to show you an image of what this could look like. Let's give it up for Ezra. Hey, buddy. Can you say hi?
Hi.
Are you shy? No? Can you say hi, everybody? Okay. He's got a lollipop, so that should keep him busy for a little bit. I was handed a script of what it means to be a father. And the script told me, you miss me? Okay, I miss you too, buddy. The script told me what it means to be a father. And the script said that you're going to raise a son that's going to be stronger than you. You're going to raise a son that's going to be successful. You're going to raise a son that can carry on your last name and your legacy. And if you can do all those things, then you would succeed as a father in this world. And when my son was born, and it's not his fault at all, when my son was born, the script that I had that I was getting ready to hand over to him was completely ripped up. And it threw me off for a few years, where I had to try to figure out my place and my purpose in life. And over the last 7 years, we've taught him so many things, but he has taught me so much more than I've ever taught him. And what he has taught me is no matter what he does in this life or what he doesn't do in this life, no matter how successful he is or how much he achieves, and he's probably going to go on to do a lot of things. In fact, he's probably changed more people's lives than I have. But no matter what he does in this world, he has taught me what it means to look at my son and tell him, I love you and I am well pleased with you, regardless of what you can do or cannot do, because I am your father and you are my son. And for some of us, they're clapping too loud. Tell them they're clapping too loud.
You're too loud.
It's too loud. All right. You guys got to clap a little quieter. And I wanted to show you this image, not to use Ezra as a prop. I'm trying to be careful not to use him as a prop in my sermon illustration, but I just want you to use this image, like taking this image of what it means for you to have a relationship with God, because it's only when I understood how I unconditionally love this kid right here that it unlocked for me the way that God views me. Like, this is my relationship with God on a daily basis. I can't figure it out on my own. I can't achieve as much as I think I want to achieve. I can't meet everyone's standards. I try my hardest, and sometimes I fail. Yet there is a God that loves me, not because of what I can do or what I don't do, but simply because I'm his son. And the encouragement for us this morning is to lead out of that place. For us to lead out of that place, you have to receive that. You have to sit in that for a moment. So I just want to invite you to bow your heads for a moment. And maybe for the first time, Whether you're a man, whether you're a son, whether you're a daughter, wherever you're at, maybe it's the first time that you've heard that you belong before you behave, that your identity is received and not earned. You don't have to strive. You don't have to climb. Maybe there's just space for some of us to just sit in that. Some healing that's needed. I don't have to leave this room trying to perform. But I can leave this room knowing that I am already received. That my best days or my worst days do not define me. But there is a God who loves me. God, I pray you would meet your people right where they're at. That you would bring healing. That you would bring healing, Lord. The parts of their lives they've hid, maybe put aside, that there would be breakthrough. The Holy Spirit, you would gently remind them of their identity. And out of that place, would they lead? Would they step into the world? Would they be a presence to their families? Out of that place, can they contribute to their community or their church, whatever it may be? But may we first and foremost understand the image of what it means for the God of the universe to love us just as we are. There's some of you that you need to know before the life stage that you find yourself in. Maybe it's in the last few years of your life. Maybe you're thriving in the prime of your life. Maybe you're stepping into your prime. Maybe you're trying to figure out what life looks like in relationship and marriage looks like. Maybe you're just in a stage of adolescence. Before you step into any of those stages, there is a God who knew you in your mother's womb and a God that loved you for who you are. God, I pray you would bring healing, you would bring restoration, you would bring contentment. I pray you would bring families together. I pray for fathers this morning on Father's Day that have distanced themselves from their kids because they didn't behave or live up to their standards. I pray that you would break those walls. Thank you that we have received not the spirit of a slave that causes us to be in fear, but the spirit of a son or a daughter, where we can look to you and say, Abba, Father. We can sit in your lap and say, Abba, Father, here I am. Would you meet your people right where they're at? It's in Christ's name we pray. And everybody said, amen.